Namaste and good evening. I, Chavi Jain, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered here for a book discussion on Brick by Brick, Democratizing Local Governance in Kerala, Insights from People's Plan campaign by Manjula Bharti. This discussion is a part of the series #Local Governance, organized by Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. I'm honored to introduce our moderator for the series, Tikendra Singh Panwar. Sir was former Deputy Mayor of Shimla and currently visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI, New Delhi. It is my further honor to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Manjula Bharti. Ma'am is a professor at Center for Urban Policy and Governance, School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. Our discussants for today are Dr. Mallika MG, Associate Professor at School of Development Studies, Thunjat Ezhuthachan, Malayalam University, Kerala, and Dr. Biju T, Associate Professor at Department of Commerce, University of Kerala. Thank you for joining us, sir and ma'am. Now, I invite our moderator, Mr. Tikendra Singh Panwar, to proceed with the deliberation. We look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Thank you, sir, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Chavi. I hope my voice is audible, or do I need to do
it's okay? Loud and clear. It's good.
Okay, fine. Thanks. So, welcome all. Chavi has already welcomed all our guests, including Professor Bharti, who is from this Mumbai, and Dr. Mallika and Dr. Viju. Welcome once again, and thanks for joining us on this series that we are running since long called #Local Governance. Actually, we've been raising issues of local governance, particularly urban governance, and not just urban governance, but issues pertaining to the larger ambit of urbanization. And for the first time, in fact, we are actually discussing a book, and it's really an honor for us actually to have two discussants, and of course, Professor Manjula, whereby the People's Plan, which in fact became one of the slogan for the left to campaign in the country, that this could be an alternative to, because it came post neoliberalization, and this could be one of the forms in which governance models could be integrated with empowerment, and what Professor Manjula has very eloquently brought in the book. Because I don't want to go into details, because it's better that Professor Manjula speaks about the book and then our discussion, then maybe later I could just comment on that. But just to give a meta narrative, actually, though that has also been very well covered in the book, that the whole question of power to the people, when we talk about decentralization, it's not just decentralization, but democratization. So maybe 30 years down the line, what has actually happened? Have the envisioned goals of People's Plan? How far have we been able to go? Because and Professor Manjula also really brings out the hierarchy that exists at the local level. Of course, caste is one of the important elements which continues to reinforce time and again. So I don't want to go into that. But I just need to go a little bit away from the book, and to bring in the whole narrative of the meta narrative of why actually this People's Plan. And let me go to post-independence. Post-independence, actually, when we had the centralized form of planning, and what was in one section of the left, the communists, was called as a socialist model of development, but in another section it was considered the whole development of public sector enterprises, public sector units, was a way in which you accumulate capital for the larger, for the big bourgeoisie, as it was termed, if you go into the literature. So, they were not really very fascinated about the way this central planning took place. And, so what could be of course, the alternative when we talk about the programs of the communists and for the left was, that they'll get revolution in the country, and then probably, we didn't know what forms of models would be developed. But, I remember being a participant to a discussion, and this was Professor Prabhat Patnaik who pointed out that, when I'm not talking about Kerala, because Kerala, Professor Bharti will definitely cover, and actually she has traversed this history from the 1957, when the first communist government was elected there. But in West Bengal, so when they came to power, they never thought that they would again come to power. Then again, they came to power the third time, 5 times. They were there. So it was Ashok Mitra who actually, this conversation between Ashok Mitra and Jyoti Basu, what would be your model of governance? How would you govern? You couldn't have brought the Soviet model, because the only model that they knew was the Soviet model. Okay, so and I don't have to go into those details. So actually, the two things that Ashok Mitra actually made the left front government do in West Bengal, one was, of course, Operation Purga, the land reforms, which is so essential, so integrated to the entire process of development. And the second was this decentralization. I won't say it was democratic, but yeah, quite, that's why you have the mayor and council stuff. I'm talking about West Bengal. So, and so how would you, what governance structures would you create? And that's why every 5 years down the line, you had elections there. Having said that, actually, what we witnessed in the People's Campaign is something post-neoliberal era. When we had multilateral institutions talking about decentralization, how is it different? I think Professor Bharti would be able to cover that. When we talk about, it's not just 40% of the state plan goes straight away to the local governments. But I think, and in the present context, why I'm more concerned, Professor Bharti, to discuss in the present context, because post-90s, and I was a member to review the 74th Constitutional Amendment with K.C. Sivaramakrishnan, we've seen how this decentralization has taken place. I mean, you pointed out that I think some 27 subjects have been decentralized in the Panchayati Raj in Kerala, but I'm afraid not in the country, not more than 3 or 4 subjects. So, and forget about democratization. So, and post-90s economy, if you talk about, we have the new gig economy, more informalization, and large-scale actually privatization of utilities. Actually, that's how the accumulation of capital is taking place, appropriation by disposition. I mean, how are you actually understanding this? I mean, was because one of the important mottos of the People's Plan was not just power to the people, but also more transparency, more equitable distribution, what I call democratic democratization of the surplus that gets generated in the society. So I think, having said that, I don't really want to go more to that detail. But yeah, I think I would love to hear what Professor Bharti has to speak about. And I haven't been able to read the entire book. It was just probably I reached half of it, and that's how I could gather what is there. But it's definitely a fascinating work that you have done. And I'm sure our discussants, Dr. Malika and Dr. Viju, would also point out how to really critically view it, and of course, what else needs to be seen in this entire process. But definitely, it was a ray of hope. It's still a ray of hope, and it is a kind of lighthouse for many local governments. And because I have been the directly elected deputy mayor of Shimla, I can understand what does it mean and what actually empowerment is all about. Over to you, Professor Bharti, and thank you.
Please unmute, ma'am.
Sorry. So thank you, Tiketa Singh, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, the entire team at IMPRI for organizing this virtual talk on my book, and specifically would like to mention Dr. Arjun Kapoor for initiating the event and to take it forward. And my thanks definitely to moderator, Mr. Jitendra Singh, and definitely to discussants, Dr. Mallika and Dr. Biju, for agreeing to do the discussion on my book. I would like to thank my PhD guide and former Finance Minister of Kerala, Professor Thomas Isaac, for encouraging me to write this book. Equally important, I feel, are the series editors of the book, Dr. Joy Elaman, Professor Harilal, and definitely Professor K.J. Joseph, Director of GIFT, who really took out his time in bringing this book out. Thank you, dear KJ. I would like to thank the subjects of my study, the tribals of Wayanad and the women of Ulur SGs, who cooperated with me in making this study participatory. Then to my family, thank you, dear ones, for supporting me with the space and the time to engage with the work of the book. Now coming to the book. Any discourse or debate on development, I think, is incomplete without critically engaging with power. And power matters, and that too very substantially. I feel as human beings, creativity, community, and communication are the major factors that connect us. And the organic link thus produced position us in our habitat, which are subsequently rooted through the socio-political and cultural dispositions as habitus that enable to navigate competently within the habitat. So when we try to understand power, I feel it is important to critically engage with the ways in which habitat and habitats forms and informs one another. One of the crises of the postmodern context, I feel, is the breakdown of the organic links between habitat and habitus, especially when we try to understand it in the context of communication and communities. When the tools of communication determine the content of the message, communication gets increasingly alienated from real communities. This gives rise to hypothetical and hyperreal communities. We could say that in a Baudrillian language, which are mechanically connected but organically alienated from one another. For instance, like in a day-to-day practice, we see that, instead when we are saying that, we are part of nature, our present life world, we could see that we are becoming a part from nature. So we are glued to the mechanical images. We are not seeing things with the eyes around us. We only hear through the mobile. Rather, I would like to say that we are becoming mobiles. So it's very interesting to see the inseparability of the self from the device, an interesting phenomenon to explore. But these virtual ways of living actually, now much facilitated and enhanced by the COVID protocol, in effect severs the organic link, an essential requirement of participatory democracy. I feel participatory democracy as a dialogue offers interesting possibilities for negotiated scapes in the emerging terrains of development discourses. The continuous relegation of the common and the day-to-day life to the periphery have resulted in various forms of collectives and resistances and has generated the voice of the subaltern. This archaeology of history need to be contexted in the context where unraveling the phenomenology of the absences becomes important when we try to understand the local narratives, and understanding that local narratives thus becomes critical and crucial. So the developmental turn in the political governance, in effect, introduce a new set of perspectives, theoretical approaches, analytical techniques to the discourse of the sustainable and the right-based ways of living. And it really speaks of inclusive and democratic structure, which actually, enable the history to read root through the lens of the subaltern. But here I would like to say that, instead of the subaltern bodies usually being said as the bodies at the sites of vulnerability or marginalization, I feel there are very strong sites of resistances also. So it is in this context of changing epistemological positions of participatory development that this book, Brick by Brick, is humble contribution from my side to unravel and understand a mammoth decentralized experience in Kerala, people planning campaign, and to see the ways in which PPC address the developmental concerns and issues of the two marginalized sections in Kerala, the women and the tribals, through its interventions of the Women Component Plan and the Tribal Subplan. Can we have slides? So the 9th plan of Kerala, it is conceived as a vehicle for deepening democracy, was a unique decentralization experience, or the experiment I would like to say, introduced by the Left Democratic Front, a coalition party led by the CPIM. And it attempted to transform the decentralization from an exercise of mere administrative reforms to understand and to mobilize for a political mobilization. So in that way, I could say that it is a real departure or an attempt of a departure of the earlier planning models in its procedures, financial affairs, and institutional setup. So people plan, if you try to see, a 35 to 40% of the state plan fund, that's a huge amount, devolved down to the local body. And I feel it's a bold political initiative towards the process of democratic decentralization. And it's one of the first of its kind in India. And the motto, like it's very important, because I would like to position the importance of power over here, because the people planning campaign, the motto is power to the people. And we know that, in academic discourses, we try to speak about, power through an unconscious subjugation of ideology that we see in an Althusserian framework, or a power that we see in a Gramscian understanding, or in a Foucauldian governmentality perspective, or the philosophy of praxis of that of Freire. But, like here, the power that I would like to position in people planning campaign is one of the, the trans power. Why it is important for me? Because it is power that is produced within systems and subsystems of social relations, in the interactions, in the microstructures that informs the practices of everyday life in politics. So one could also see that in these structures and microstructures, people are not having equal access in their ability to exercise power. And these inequitable power relations are very problematic. It could be gender relations, it could be caste relations, it could be class relation, it could be ethnic relations, but inequitable power relations are very problematic. It is here that one could also see the ways in which the dominant group also exercises the power to maintain the status quo. But here in PPC power, when I try to speak in the trans power, especially in the moment of a hegemonic, there is a hegemonic crisis over here, which is basically designed by the dominant class to sabotage any subaltern movement. So the crisis here is what, that old is dying out. Here, the old forms of the centralized planning system that has been there in the place is dying out. And then there is a new attempt of decentralized planning that is coming into being, but that cannot be born, that the true understanding of the devolution of the power, that is not born. So it is this interval, a great variety of morbid systems appear. And trans, by being the name, it is temporary, fluid, floating, rootlessness, could be easily then appropriated by the vested interest and could make it appear like a permanent structure. So in the case of PPC, what's happening, that it had departed from the normative understanding of the centralization and its rigid technocratic and bureaucratic procedures and languages, but it is yet to reach the devolution of power phase with decentralization and still groping in the trans phase. So it is that, it is here that one could see could be a fertile ground for seizures and appropriation. So can we have the next slide, please? So here, then, the whole question about my book trying to understand the tribal subplan, women component plan, and the media plans of the people planning campaign, and try to see, What are the variables in the development approaches of the PPC that help the success? I could say a partial success of the women component plan. And what were the reason for the dysfunctions of the development approaches of the tribal sub-plan in the tribal context? And then looking at that, where media is so important in disseminating the information of this mammoth decentralization experience, what is the role? Why media plan? Because media is always turned to be a fourth pillar of democracy and trying to work with a counter hegemony. Why it could not be a counter hegemonic one? So that is the basic questions that one is posing over here. Can we have the next slide, please? So these are the 6 phases of PPC, where you could see the first phase of Gram Sabha, where the people comes there and says about their felt needs, and then through the development seminar, they try to make that in the shelf of projects. And then, they try to integrate and make that as a kind of plans at the district panchayat level, and then at the block and the district plan. And then there is a plan appraisal. So here again, there's a very interesting innovation that is being brought by PPC is the voluntary technical corps, where, through an advertisement that has been given in the print and the electronic media, the retired hands were asked to be part of this decentralization process voluntarily. And they actually, there's a lot of enthusiasm from the retired people to be part of this process for looking at the technical viability, financial feasibility, and then to make that project, So these are the 6 phases through which the PPC tried to make the plan process. So can we have the next slide, please? So coming to the women component plan, see now, if you're looking at that, then the whole question about the women development initiatives, and then Kerala has been always discussed as one of the important ways in which, Kerala development model, and where the gendering process or the women component plan or the women development has been given one of the important building block in making the Kerala model of development. But in spite of that, I would like to argue that, okay, there's a socioeconomic development, but the status of women in Kerala is not enhanced with respect to the given socio-economic, indicators. So there is, like that. So like when we are saying about there is a shift from the women integrated development to the gender and development, the people planning campaign was having a cautious and a conscious way of involving and, to change that, that women could make a dent, a change in the presence of the public spheres. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So these are the ways in which the 6 phases, there is an identifying the felt needs of the people, so the women were there, and then special chapter in development report on the gender issues, and then special task force for women was there, and a separate chapter on women development projects was there, and 10% to be set apart for the women component plan, and a separate chapter on women development projects. So this 10% of the total plan, that to be laid out specifically for the women component plan is one of the important interventions that one could see in the case of people planning campaign in Kerala. Can we have the next slide, please? So here, I would like to say that, why, Kerala could not strike a direct correlation with this improvement in gender development indicators to the corresponding changes to the status of women. The patriarchal hegemonic power structures interwoven into the everyday lives of the women, and that too in all spaces in Kerala, made women internalize their subordinate position as normative and normal. And I would like to say 2 examples which I have, encountered in my life there, like the people planning campaign, See, one of the things that when we were asking in the icebreaking section, I was asking people, the women group, and then that was an ice-breaking session, and asking the women to throw the pictures which are familiar to them. And most of the women came out with the pictures of men and asked the question, reason for that. And then one woman who was actually 70 said, I entered the kitchen at 15 there when I started cooking for my father. Then I started cooking for my husband, and then for my son, and then for my grandson. And then, so, I don't know what is the taste of my tongue, and I don't know what is the color of it, you know. So I've never done anything to satisfy my taste buds. So I don't know what is my taste and what is the order of my taste bud, you know. So it is, I felt it is very powerful, you know, this word. And another one which I, really, and actually the title of my next book that is already coming out, you know, it is No One Is Here, you know, politics of being. So, you know, why? Because I was doing the studies in 8 states, different states in India. And then in one of the studies, when I was doing, I was actually being, you know, like taking with a Norwegian fund, and one of the Norwegian researchers was also with me, and I was translating what the women were saying. And I usually go in the afternoon, because that is the time when they are comparatively free. So when I knock the door, then they will come and open the door. And invariably in all the 8 states that I've studied, one of the first response that I'll get is no one is here. So then I'll tell them, you know, that no, I come here to have an interaction with you because I'm trying to understand.
You said, Professor Manjula, nobody is here.
No one is here.
No one is
So
here.
they will come, open the door and say, no one is here. Or yahan koi nahi hai. You know, so the question, you know, like whether it is in a Hindi belt, they'll say in Hindi, in Kerala, they'll say in Malayalam, only the language differs, but the idea is same, no one is here. So then, you know, then I'll tell them, but the Scandinavian researcher asked me, you know, why Manjula, they're all coming and opening the door and saying no one is here. So this actually struck me because I am the person who is actually trying to understand and read the hegemony, and how I myself is a part and parcel of this hegemonic process, that I could not understand the ways in which women internalizes their own absences. And that is why they're coming to the threshold of a door and saying no one is here. So how we know that valuable contributions of women are unrecorded, unrecognized, unpaid, and their presence are made invisible and their voices inaudible. So this continuous presences of absences in their lives and the historicity of these absences, and then making them internalizing this phenomenology of absences, making them to be absent before their own eyes, saying that no one is here. And then we could see that even in the governance structure, we could see, you know, their novel initiatives are nipped in the bud, terming it as dysfunctional of the novices. So the market-centric neoliberal policies of globalization that cater to the vested interests of the corporate and the patriarchy, coupled with the hegemony of capital in the socio-political spaces, deteriorated the status of women in Kerala. So, but my question was whether, you know, this people planning campaign is able to make a change from this politics of absence to a politics of presence, to a politics of being, or a politics of subjectivity, using their agency in the positions, you know. So I could, you know, my studies with the women, we could see that the people planning campaign had a series of trainings at different levels that made them to understand the gender position, the status of the women, and also the power interwoven in the socio-cultural political spaces, and to make them the positionality to position them as women in the multivariate positions. And the advanced training and the quality of deliberations made them, and one of the important results I feel is the emergence of the women collectives in the forms of self-help groups. And then also the women's status report. They're coming out and bringing out the status of the women, which I said is so important to understand that. And then the politics of presence of women, you know, in the public sphere of Kerala was important. And that I felt, you know, one of the important contributions of the people planning campaign to the engendering phases was the formation of the Kudumbasri. Can we have the next slide, please? The politics of women in the public sphere and the formation of the Kudumbasri for me are the two significant contributions of the engendering phase of the people planning campaign in Kerala. So Kudumbasri, you know, it's a community-based research community-based organization, and it is one of the largest community-based organization in the world with 4.5 million women. And these women are federated into different tiers like neighborhood groups, area development societies, and then community development societies. And then, like SHGs are kind of transferred into the changed into neighborhood groups. The whole, the right-based interventions of the Kudumbasri women, the synergic ways in which they work with the local governance, and then the various interventions of the Kudumbasri, like the social infrastructure, employment generation, food security, in the area of health insurance, housing, all are important, that makes women in the very much visible in the public spaces and the public sphere of Kerala, So that I felt is so important. And then when I'm asking women, they're saying we got a space in home. So that, that was very interesting comments the Kudumbasri women were saying, because, like if you're looking at the Pata Chatterjee's understanding of the women question in the modernity process, and then the ways in which, the private public questions has been divided, and then the women are there in the home, but then they're saying that we are getting visibility in the home, My husband now introduces me as a chairperson, as a member. So there is a change from an individual who has been defined by the social relations of power to a citizen. So this process of women from an individual to a citizen and the gendered citizenship, I feel, is very important process of the people planning campaign started, Then bank manager, they say that bank manager call me madam. I get an invitation letter in my name rather than, Mrs. So-and-so. So we may think it's so trivial, but in the everyday life of the women, to get an invitation letter in their own name is so significant for them, And then the whole important second one is the whole question of comradeship, kinship. So when we're looking at women, like that, the kinship is actually coming from the family. That is, there are no friends. After the marriage, you belong to the family. So, but here that it is bringing back that comradeship, that friendship among the women. They said, in moment of crisis, I can lean on my friend and not alone on my family. And when I die, I'm sure that I will get at least 10 breath from the public spaces. So it also speaks of, a posthumous public recognition. It is important, like Nancy Fraser's understanding of, politics of recognition, politics of, recognition as counter publics in the public sphere. So that speaks of, the importance of changing the invisibility of women and making them, at least a passive, at least a partial visible in the public sphere. And now, like, can we have the next slide? Now I would like to look at the tribal subplan, which was not as worked as good as the women component plan. And in my analysis, I would like to say that, okay, it is actually not a good one. So if you're looking at that, that women as citizens, that I said, there's a change from the individual to citizens, and politics of presence of the marginalized and excluded at the local level. There's an enhanced recognition at the personal, family, and the societal positions, making monologue into a dialogue and informed citizenry. So it's important because whenever we're discussing about decentralized planning, an informed citizen is important. So there's a question of informed citizen through massive training and poverty eradication. If you're looking at that to a right-based holistic perspective, and they also elect their own representatives. So they have a vote and voice through the process of election. So can we have the next slide? So here, I would like to start with a very, very powerful poem by one of the tribal activists. He has written it, Varumira. So Varu Sonavena. So is a poem from the stage. I would like to read it. We did not go up the stage that was made in our name, nor were we invited onto it. We were shown our place with pointed finger, and we sat there obediently. We were highly appreciated, and they, standing on the stage, kept telling us of our own misery. But our misery remained ours alone. It was never theirs. We mumbled, uttered our doubts. They listened intently and wrote, pulling us by the ear, admonished us, say sorry, otherwise. So I feel this 84 line, it's such a powerful one that discusses, about the issue of appropriation of tribal life and their ways of seeing by the dominant group. It's just 84 words. It was more than enough for a tribal poet to explain in depth the decay from within of the experiments, paradigms, theories that we speak, discourses, and then restructuring, and then about the failures of the top-down programs. So Ramchandra Guha, I would like to, quote from an essay on the occasion of the India's 60th recently Republic Day. He points out to the widespread neglect of the tribals, and he, in that his essay, quote Jaipal Singh Mudra, a spokesperson of the tribal interest, and then he was making a speech in the Constituent Assembly of India. So I quote, "Sir, if there is any group of Indian people that has been shabbily treated, it is my people. They have been disgracefully treated, neglected for the last 6,000 years. The whole history of my people is one of continuous exploitation and dispossession by the non-aboriginals of India, punctuated by rebellions and disorder. I take you all at your word that now we are going to start a new chapter of independent India, where there is equality of opportunity, where no one would be neglected." I unquote. 6 decades, I feel that since this speech was made, the tribal development still remains a mirage with no remarkable difference. So even with innumerable plethora of development policies and programs designed to improve the welfare of the tribals, the approach I usually feel being very paternalistic, ignoring the strength of the indigenous institutions and knowledge of the tribals. And this in turn, I feel, contributed to worsening their poverty. So in Kerala also, one could see the exclusion patterns of the tribals operating in different spaces. Can we have the next slide, please? So the PPC also tried to have, because knowing that, okay, the PPC is, one of the interests is to give the voices to the marginalized, to increase the voices of the marginalized in the decision-making process. They have made very cautious interventions here. They made, one of the important interventions was a separate Uru Sabha, that is a tribal Gram Sabha, was made mandatory so that the tribals could air their problem. And the separate discussion groups, because we know that there is a culture of silence and it is not possible for the people, the tribals to speak in the usual Grama Sabha. So separate Grama Sabha was formed, a separate task force was formed, and a special review mechanisms was also formed. And then we also have, the PPC also conducted separate conscientization classes for the elected representatives. Can we have the next slide? But the process of exclusion that that you could see, this is one of the flow chart that I've made in Panamera, my area of study in Wayanad. The multiple ways of, if you're looking for the land, if you're looking for the communication method, if you're looking for the political intervention, if you're looking for the development intervention, if you're looking for the education interventions. So how, the multiple ways of push and pull effects alienated and excluded the tribals in their own habitat. Can we have the next slide, please? So one of the important interventions PPC started trying was the introduction of social activists. The social activists was a group of people, tribal youth, matriculate or above, selected by the planning board to work in the tribal hamlets and then to report back to the local needs, demands of each tribal community, so that planning board could redesign the tribal subplan, incorporating more tribal participation. A consolidated monthly salary of ₹1,000 was given to the social activists. They were given training, they were given facilitation classes to be in the tribal hamlets, and then to be the interlocutor between, tribal hamlets and the planning board. But what we feel, and then the planning, the Kerala experiments also says that the social activists first defeated the very purpose for which they were formed the PPC. Once they were inducted into the people planning process, then they like to identify themselves as a part of the bureaucracy. So every morning I could see them, getting dressed up and going to the tribal extension officer, and then they would like to work the sundry jobs, like even doing the sundry jobs of the tribal extension officer, bringing him tea and, doing the accounting work there. And they are not interested to spend time in the tribal hamlets. So the whole question about the ways in which the education system gave them a feeling of getting coming to a higher pedestal the moment they have been affiliated with a tribal extension officer is something that we need to see and critically question about the educational system. And then they started blaming the tribals, their own groups, as the causative factors for the failure of PPC. So I could see a very well, a question coming out, the difference of, us and them coming in the perspectives of the people. Can we have the next slide, please? So the other thing that we would like to speak about is the media, the role of the media, the information dissemination role of the media, the advocacy role of the media, and the vox populi role of the media is so important, because decentralized planning, the voices of the people are so important. But on the one hand, we're speaking about the voice of the people are important. At the same time, the media, the conglomerization of the media, the concentration of the media through mergers, acquisitions, and the conglomerization, media is getting concentrated. So how can we think about, decentralization of the media? So the framing and the agenda setting ways, and then the way in which they hegemonize the consent. So I feel through my study, that the media plan, so I have done the study of 4 regional papers and also 2 national papers, and also an analysis of a content analysis of the media that has been produced, electronic content that has been produced as a part of the people planning campaign. But through the analysis, I found that the media plan was also could not place, could not do a counter hegemony structure to that. So so media was also, like that finding it's difficult. So that the last part that I would like to say is, can we have the next slide? So one of the 3 things while I feel problematic in the people planning campaign is the consumeristic ethics and the PPC, because this, like the whole idea of about the people to be a part of the people planning campaign, to be needed to be political, but how the consumeristic ethics makes people, apolitical, not interested, and making consumerism as the way of life, and how then depoliticizes and becoming them apolitical, and Dino syndrome that enlarges the situations and making the situation big, and mediation of the politics. The politics has always been seen as a huge drama to see, and like a serial opera to work it, and that also where, and devolution and organic intellectuals were never in the picture. Next slide. So I would like to end, when we're seeing about the power structure and the importance of, the consumerist world, how the things are not coming in the encompassing consumeristic ethics, where we feel shopping, buying, and consuming are the ways of expressing oneself, where the whole question about the decentralized governance, the politics of the decentralized governance is not an important there. So embedded in a web of power relations, again, I feel, and consumed by the anxieties about their own marginalities and the legacies of the past neglect. The marginals, I again feel, internalizes the hegemonic values and norms into their cognitive and emotional and psychic systems and structures. And most of them, happens in an unconscious way, as the hegemony of the power is strongly internalized by the marginals. And I would like to end the talk and the book also. I ended by quoting a powerful and insightful anecdote shared by a grassroots women worker. I would like to quote that. We are the chosen few to ride the boat of decentralization through the troubled waters of power politics to reach the island of Power. It is a new boat with a forward-facing rowing facility. The moment the great journey was declared inaugurated, we placed our oars in the oarlocks and pushed the water backward to take the boat forward. As the backlash created swashes, those on the land clapped and cheered us. It was a great moment of pride, joy, and confidence for us. After days and months of rowing, we know we had to go a long distance to reach the island of Power. Some of us pointed out we had not moved an inch. It was unbelievable though, by this time, everyone was convinced what they had said was true. We didn't understand what went wrong. Was it our inexperience in rowing? Didn't we hold the oars correctly? A few of our friends dropped the oars in the water and jumped into the water and began to swim in their earnest attempt to reach the island of Power. As we continued rowing without any progress, we saw some of our friends drowning and disappearing into the translucent layers of water. A few others were still swimming, braving the waves and oblivious of the undercurrents. Will they make it? Or will they too vanish into the blue? Did the dead see anything more than we had seen? Will those who are still swimming see anything more than the dead had seen? Who is better positioned? The dead, the struggling warriors, or we who are on the boat? We know the boat wouldn't move an inch. We know its keel is tied to the ground using an invisible chain we could not never break. We are tired. Our sweat may one day flood the river. We are rowing. In the end, it is still the Power. Thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. So, thank you so much, Professor Manjula, for this very powerful presentation, by the way. And in fact, this is what I also wanted to say, a long way to go, and because there are many experiments probably in the final experiment that we have to do. And there's a very famous Hindi song, by the way, and this is what we used to sing during our university days. And apparently many of I mean, those who are into the people's movement are still singing that. I'll translate it in English later. I don't know how good the translation will be, but let me just do it in Hindi first. That हम मेहनतकश वाले जग वालों से जो अपना हिस्सा मांगेंगे, एक देश नहीं, हम पूरी दुनिया मांगेंगे. So when we will demand, we'll not just demand the nation, but we'll demand the entire world. And probably that is how we have to reclaim our spaces in democratic governance, in whatever is ours. And I think the entire world is ours. Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you brought in this this Gramscian organic intellectuals also, because I don't know, somehow we are missing these terms. So thank you so much. I don't want to say anything more than that. So Arjun, are you there? I mean, how do we go about it? So is it Dr. Biju or Dr. Malika who would like to take the floor first and maybe start the discussion?
So your preference.
No, not my preference. Let the preference be of the discussants. Dr. Malika, you would like to go first?
Yeah, no problem, sir.
Please go.
Thank you for calling me as a discussor. And thank you, sir, for a very wonderful presentation. As I'm living in Kerala and really know the actual working and experiencing this. So, well, hearing it from a researcher's point of view, it's really it's an eye-opener. And this book, I feel it is something just we can enjoy, just like a novel, and also it's having very serious research topic it included, not like any other women empowerment so-called articles which highlighted this empowered women in Kerala and this kind of all these propagations with a biased nature. So we are just creating a biased answer, and after that we are creating some kind of information. Not like that. Manjula's article is basically it's a very serious research. That's what I had seen, and so while going through this book and hearing her presentation, I found it's a really wonderful thing. because only when critically evaluating the actual conditions in a society, we can try to improve it, and also we have to just find out another solutions. It's provided a historical roots of this decentralized planning in India and Kerala, and it can be a good reference book for the PG or research students. That's what I definitely will recommend this for my students for a reference material for decentralization. And also it includes a lot of theoretical understanding. It's not a narration of data or something. It provides some kind of very good theoretical understanding to view certain things. And this approach is basically a qualitative nature, but it substantiates enough quantitative information to provide a good research work. And what she had narrated, she had given in this kind of women component plan or the women participation in people planning. I just had some kind of addition to this, because this women Kudumbashri and also the self-help groups basically targeting the less privileged poverty eradication. This is poverty eradication measure. So that's the majority of the women who are educated and highly need to participate in the power is excluded. So somebody we are just including in this power deliberately. The other side we excluded so many other persons. That's why majority of the women leaders in colleges who are participated and had done a lot of work, but we never had seen them in this political arena. And those who are inside the households and their housewives, and they need to enter, so get a space, that kind of people, they got all these powers. So this is the major problem that's what I had seen, because in the initial stages, I also participated in this Gram Sabha, and there I realized when this Manjula had written very clearly that it's only this, those who want to get some kind of benefits from this, there's the distribution of the benefits. The very philosophy of this Gram Sabha is nobody had realized the very philosophy of this Gram Sabha. Whether a place we need to plan something and to implement and discuss the development issues, but the people who are going there, they need to just find out something what they should get. So that people will go there and they will dominate this space, and the other people who really want to participate will be actually excluded due to this compulsory inclusion. So that's what I had seen. And also another thing is that due to this and the last chapter of this textbook, she clearly narrated this COVID and the Nipah and this this kind of a flood situation, how these people's participation has created a very good implementation of this kind of information and the communication and this voluntary work, all these areas, it worked a lot. But at the same time, you see that the other people, the majority of the educated group people, and they are in the middle class, they have enough potential, are excluded. So this part should be, it's a very major problem in this Kerala's with decentralized planning. That's what I had seen. And their involvement, that means that we are just seeing the number of these participants in Gram Sabha. And another thing is that in the new generation, at the present condition I had seen, the new generation, new women, these groups of some, these girls are emerging in this, they are coming. But at the same time, we are not, the invisibility of male members are also another problem here, because this, whenever we are just trying to include somebody, so we should not exclude others. So there's a planning or the democratization of this planning that should inclusive to all. So that part is very important. Another thing is that the social activist in the case that Manjula Bharati has mentioned, that I also realized it, that presently this on vacation, I just visited 5 villages, 5 tribal colonies in Kerala, in Wayanad. But there also I had these, the problem is that all those who are selected as social activists belongs to the upper class of the Brahmin class of the tribal community, especially Kuruma and Kuruchia community. And these people consider themselves as Brahmins. They will not have any kind of connection with the other tribal communities. So, and also these kind of, whenever we are just implementing, and another thing is that in Meenangadi Panchayat, they had done some kind of thing, some kind of program. They just with the what is that close relation with this tribal Katanaika community, and they developed certain persons and worked with that without giving any kind of honorarium or anything, a voluntary work. These people had worked a lot, that had contributed a lot to this development activities. And if we are just imparting some kind of economic benefit or some kind of power hierarchy to these people, so that actually there's a Sanskritization, no? So that means they are trying to imitate the upper class because they are getting some kind of these benefits. And so there are a lot of other problems while we are just living with them, and participant observation will provide a lot of good information related to this. Because it's not because of lack of education or lack of awareness, but these people are excluded. I had some students who had given me some kind of notes that there's a PG, postgraduate student from Katanaika community. She's living in a place where the very pathetic house conditions and also she's not at all able to communicate with this this tribal department or anything, because though they are educated or they are having this kind of capability, they are not able to approach this tribal department. All the tribal departments are set up in urban areas, and all these tribal communities are in rural, remote areas. So all this planning and the days, and we are trying to civilize them. So in all the languages itself is the communication itself is having a big problem. So that's what Manjula Bharati is trying to. That's communication, and how this people's campaign, that the communication is emerged from the grassroots to top layer, but that does not happen in the case of tribal communities. So I found this book is really an eye-opener, and we need to discuss about this book, and we have to start something more. And this book will give some kind of a path to further discussion about the Kerala's development experience, and another way through which we can just discuss the development experience of Kerala. Thank you.
You're muted. Mr. Tikendra Singh, you're muted.
Sorry. So thank you, Dr. Mallika, and Professor Manjula, if you're there. What I suggest is let Dr. Biju also actually comment on the lecture that you've given, and then maybe you can respond once both have actually commented on it. Is it fine, Professor Manjula, or do you want to just respond to?
Sure. That will be the best thing. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, great. So thank you. So Dr. Biju, over to you.
Thank you, Tikendra sir. And first of all, congratulations, Professor Manjula Bharati. I'm very happy to be here because I have been acquainted with Professor Manjula from 2013 onwards. So I got the opportunity to work with her while she was working in Kudumbashree Mission as Chief Operating Officer, because I was the district coordinator of Kudumbashree Mission at that point of time in Kollam district. So during her tenure as the Chief Operating Officer in Kudumbashree, she expressed her vigor and enthusiasm in utilizing the research capacity she possessed for the well-being of the rural poor and the marginalized in Kerala. I still remember the days when she initiated the micro-level planning process among the tribes in Kerala. As Mallika ma'am rightly pointed out that whenever we select some activist or resource persons or something from the tribal population, we used to select it from the upper strata of the tribal community. But at the time of the micro-level planning process initiated by Manjula ma'am along with the district coordinators in Kerala, we actually selected we actually take the pain to select students who just have SSLC level or below that, and they are able to read or write. That kind of students are selected and trained as volunteers for the micro level planning process among tribes in Kerala. That was really a wonderful experience. And I also remember the research we did together for the crime mapping in selected local self-government institutions in Kerala. And I appreciate, Madam, your sincere efforts to start a community college for the continuing education of the women members of Kudumbashree Mission in Kerala. So once again, congratulations, Professor Manjula Bharati. And I also take this opportunity to congratulate the IMPRI Center for Habitat and Urban and Regional Studies for organizing a web talk series on local governance, because it is a very nice thing, because we need to impart this kind of knowledge to all the people, especially on the book written by Manjula ma'am on People's Planning Campaign in Kerala in the light of democratizing the local governance in Kerala. So as we all know, the People's Planning Campaign in Kerala set a model for all of us in India, and we may say that for the world itself for democratizing the local governance. So this book on democratizing the local governance in Kerala by Professor Manjula Bharati really narrated the process in an elaborative manner. Only a researcher with real life experience in sensing the merits and demerits of decentralization through the People's Planning Campaign would be able to do this. So the whole content is structurally divided into 7 chapters, which each chapter deals with various aspects of the People's Plan Campaign in the different sections of the society, as she elaborated among the women, the tribes, and the role of media and all. So in the first chapter itself, it gives a clear picture of the diversification of power from the divine rights theory to the neo-Marxist interpretations, a comprehensive presentation of the decentralization, its emergence over the years, the participatory communication process of the People's Plan Campaign, the development strategies of the People Plan for the upliftment of women population in the society through the microcredit and SNGs, the role of media, and I could say that it also touches the topic of post-decentralization phase of the People's Plan Campaign also. Altogether, as Mallika ma'am pointed out, this is a good reference book for the future researchers in the area of rural development, the women development, as well as the local governance and all. So this gives a vivid account of People's Plan Campaign in Kerala. Of course, the participatory planning methodology, everything is well narrated by Professor Manjula Bharati. But ma'am, through a critical look, I would like to state some of my observations also, because I think that by including some of them, it would add to your already perfect narration on the decentralization process. I think 2 major bricks of decentralization of Kerala is one is a comprehensive legislation such as Kerala Panchayati Raj Act 1994, and the other one is Kerala Municipality Act 1994, along with its features that also, if that could be added along with this, that will be good reference material for all the researchers in the decentralization process. Another thing is, as you know, because you are part of preparing this GEO and all. So in 1995, in Kerala, we prepared and announced a government order in 1995 for devolving the functionaries based on the principle of worker along with the work. That is an important government order. Through that government order, we are able to materialize the dreams which we put forth through the People's Planning Campaign. Because I think that evolving of functionaries in Kerala paves the way for better functioning of our LSGIs. Even now in states like UP and all, somewhat 10 to 12 panchayats have only one secretary. But in Kerala, the situation is entirely different. We have a well-structured system of functionaries, and over the years, they have adapted it and taken up into their own hands, and activities of planning and implementation, everything is devolved to the public, and the functionaries are leading them in an efficient and effective manner. And the second one is actually the institutionalization efforts during the 10th five-year plan. As you said, in the 9th five-year plan, we have decided to give 25% to 40% of the funds directly to the LSGIs. It's a revolutionary thing, actually. And the second thing is actually in the 10th five-year plan period, we decided for institutionalization of the efforts that ensure the sustenance of the People's Plan campaign in Kerala, which also I think need special attention. So that is the thing we need more attention, and your concentration is on the women and the tribal community, of course. But we need to address some more the marginalized sections of the community, especially the coastal people, the artisanal people in Kerala, and the levels of participation issues relating to it also need to be addressed. In the future area, as Dikandar Singh sir rightly pointed out in the first phase itself, we need to see what will be the future, of all these things. There we need to address one or two things also, because you mentioned about the modus operandi of all these things in the People's Plan campaign. The Gram Sabha comes first, but in the Gram Sabha aspect itself, there are 4 different Gram Sabhas actually. There are 4 different Gram Sabhas. The first one is the planning Gram Sabha, and the second one is the implementation Gram Sabha, and the third one is the monitoring and evaluation Gram Sabha, and the fourth one is, of course, the very important one, the social audit Gram Sabha. Actually, we are now lagging with that particular Gram Sabha, because we need to do that in the 25th year of our People's Plan campaign during the celebration. And regarding one thing which has pointed out by Mallika ma'am, you said that the middle class as well as the new generation people are get excluded among the women. That is why the present government, the present Left Democratic Front government, they have initiated a new thing through Kudumbashree Mission. We are going to start a new thing now, that is the satellite units for energies. In the structure of energy, that is the SHG in Kerala is known as energy, neighborhood groups. The structure of energy is only one member, only one women member from a family can become a member of an SHG. But here now the present government for including the middle class as well as the young generation from the families, we are going to start the satellite energies affiliated with the CDS. That also is a revolutionary move from the present LDF government. Anyway, I wish to congratulate, and I am very happy to testify that this book is an eye-opener indeed. So, and I am very happy to call me to be part of this venture also. Thank you, madam. Thank you, Dikandar Singh.
Thank you, Dr. Biju. I mean, it was really interesting where you mentioned about, I mean, of course, you said you testified. It's important for the book, but at the same time, I mean, some of the critical observations. Now, before Professor Manjula, you respond, actually, I also have 2-3 queries, and then probably we can go for the way forward. Now, you see, what is important here is, and that comes out of my praxis, the practice, because I've been in the city governance role, and now I work with the network of cities. That's what we're trying to build. This whole question that Dr. Mallika raised and Dr. Biju also raised, and you talk about 3 C's, if I remember, in your book, creativity, and communication and 1C probably are missing. Yeah. So I think, how creatively, though Dr. Biju mentioned something about that, are you actually witnessing, because this paradigm change that has happened, we can find it pan-India. I don't know how pernicious it is in Kerala, because there's a stark difference between urban and rural. And because the kind of policies that we are witnessing from the center, take for example the smart cities. I've written so many times, smart city is like writing an obituary of the 74th constitutional amendment, where alienation, the entire process of participatory governance is completely scuttled. So how does, and one of the reasons that I can maybe remotely understand or comprehend for the rising middle class not participating. So do you find a difference between rural Kerala and urban Kerala, this form of participation in the process of planning? Because inherently the process of planning is quite discriminatory. It leads to it leads to alienation, because they don't want, the smart cities. The idea is that they are techno experts, more capital intensive technologies must enter. Why should you worry about that? I mean, that's the larger picture, the larger gamut that we are talking about at a national. And that's why, most of the plans, it's not the city that develops the plans, it's the parastatals. You have the Mumbai Development Authorities, the Delhi Development Authorities. I don't know how it works in Kerala. So when you transgress this idea to the people that, look, there's someone else who's planning, so this alienation further gets consolidated and further alienation. So how do you actually understand in the present context? And what is it? What is the kind of process, and how the present government, or the kind of interventions that is being made, is trying to arrest it, if at all that is done. Then I think, and of course, this also leads to the ownership, because ownership and alienation are two sides of the same coin. It's the flip side. So bringing back people into this process of ownership, reclaiming what we call right to the city, because I work more amongst the urban centers. So what is it that you are witnessing? I think, and this, because this is interesting what Dr. Biju is pointing out. I didn't hear that. This satellite sounds good, but at the same time, what about the no organic intellectuals? The kind of, so you bring structures, and those structures itself turn out to be impediments for the basic idea that you're trying to build. So do you find some kind of creative intervention, or creatively understanding this process? Because it's very dynamic. It's not static. What was 25 years ago, it's not the same. So that's all, Professor Manjula, and I think you can respond to it.
So thank you. So the first question, I will, first respond, because since you asked the question, so I can respond to that. One of the first question is the distinction between the rural and the urban. Unlike the other parts of India, the Kerala model of development, one of the defining characteristics is the continuity of the rural-urban spectrum, and we call it as rural. Neither rural nor urban. There's a continuity. So even you go to the very distant spaces, you could see a public health center there. You could see STD booths working. You could see the roads, connectivity roads there. You could see the basic amenities working. So that is one of the Kerala model development, one of the distinctive feature that differentiates between the rural and urban sites in other parts of, because I work in Maharashtra and I live in Mumbai. So when I go to the outskirts of Maharashtra, you feel that you are entering into a different premise altogether. So that different kind of spaces is not able to see in Kerala. So we'll call it as a rural. But still acknowledging the urban premises, the people planning campaign and the planning processes, and even in the case of Kudumbashree, one could see that the activities that you see in the panchayats is more vibrant, more active than that you see in the ward committees. So the urban spaces still need to kind of pick up that momentum, though it is not as bad as that you see in the other parts. Because right now I'm trying to understand the ward committees in Maharashtra and other places. there it is not as good, but the Kerala, it is in a much better place. So that is the one thing of the urban spaces. And the second one that you are asking about the organic intellectuals, very interesting question. But the organic intellectual is an answer to the counter hegemony, right? And the hegemony is in a such a way that it normalizes the way, the ideology to common sense through the socialization practices, and how the ideology then becomes the common sense and hegemonizing it. But in Kerala, that if you're looking at, for example, women, the patriarchy as ideology is made into a common sense in the social spaces. So hegemonizing that. So when a woman getting, molested or violated, when she accesses the public spaces after 6, 7, it is actually the women who have been blamed for that because of this panoptic gaze that is there, which has been normalized. So this normalization process and the patriarchal and the capitalistic order, even in the left society, the embedded society of the Kerala, you could see it is still patriarchal. You could see the number of the gender-based violence, increasing the gender-based violence in Kerala. The number of pedophilia that is increasing in Kerala. The number of dowry deaths, now is becoming an alarming rate in Kerala. So there is a very patriarchal gaze. That is what I said in the beginning. You have, IMR rate, infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, the sex ratio, all, the indicators, the conventional gender indicators are all saying, good for the Kerala model of development. But if you're looking at the proxy indicators, like, the gender-based violence, the morbidity rate of the women, the suicide rate of the women, that is increasing. And more importantly, working participation rate of women, So I feel that is the most crux. So 96, more than 90% is the literacy rate in Kerala, where it is 50 to 60 in India. But when India has a female working participation rate of 30 plus, Kerala has a working participation rate just 15 plus, or 16. So where are these working women going? Sorry, where are these educated women going? So that shows the patriarchal gaze. Your education is to domesticate the women as a good woman. Marriage, because education, convent educated women, English speaking woman, a girl, is highly saleable commodity in the marriage market. So that so then when you're looking at that, how the patriarchal ideology is becoming a common sense and then hegemonizing it. So to counter hegemonize that, then that means the people who are working with these people to question the critical consciousness and then to come out, have, social consciousness, hegemony consciousness, and then come out for a corporate consciousness to bring the hegemony consciousness open for, and that, that needs a war of position and a war of movement. Like Gramsci was saying, but here in Kerala, what we see is only a war of, is that war of movement, that changing that structure, going there, confronting there. Somewhere you can see that the war of position is a trench, that kind of, guerrilla movement that people are looking back and working it, The counter, to have the counter hegemony, you should have the people working with the women, with the system, and to open this the fissures of that consciousness that embedded into that psyche, and say that, okay, this has been molded by the patriarchal one, So you need to open that thing. And that, I feel that whether our education system, our public sphere system, and our politically activated system is able to have that, I'm very doubtful. That is why that, we could not see much of, when there are issues, we could not see the resistances much coming from there. And those resistances coming has always been branded as feminist, in Kerala, feminist, that with the quote unquote, it's not a good term, So it is, Kerala is still I feel, a very, very patriarchal society, and we hope, because I'm an optimist, and I hope, the trans phase, and we will have, like you say, hoping for the real counter hegemony to come through the organic intellectuals to put us through the war of movement and position. And then, Biju, your question that you're asking is, let's say, it is because the people planning campaign is a mammoth process. and it could be analyzed from multiple and varied angles. Because like you're saying about legislation and that analysis, it's very important. But then and one is that my area of expertise is not on that, because I am from a sociology background and would like to look at that, gender and the tribals, and that is the area that I'm working. And second thing is that, okay, if you're bringing so many elements, because multi-variables, there is the infrastructure that, like we're saying about social infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and then the devolution structures and the bureaucratic patterns that you're suggesting about, all are, itself demands exploration to make that into a separate book title. So it is huge, the ways in which, because in my PhD I said that, okay, one government order has been revisited 17 times. So every time, so to make it participatory, so that has just given a hint, how participatory every time, so that itself demands another book to understand the very comprehensive, deep, embedded ways in which, the bureaucratic things has been deconstructed to align with the requirements of the people planning campaign. That is, and then I'm very interested, because first time I'm hearing about satellite energies. Is a new thing to me, and I will try to learn more about it. It's a very interesting concept. And then definitely, the Gram Sabha having the 4 phases, and we are still looking for the social auditing phase of the Gram Sabha, right? Yeah. And Malika, right now, that you said, it is true, that the social activists, because I didn't mention, even in the book also, I think I've not mentioned that part, which you pointed out very clearly, the social activists are coming actually from the Kuruchyas, and the Kuruchya consider themselves as Brahmins. And then the other groups like Adiyas and Paniyas, who actually constitute more than 60 to 70% of the tribal population, the Panamaram Panchayat that I've studied, and how they were considered as, outcast by the Kuruchya community. And even Kuruchya community even consider, when I go there, they also consider, them as Brahmins, at the base of living is that they consider them as, position that. And most of the social activists, because of their epistemological understanding and the ontological positioning of putting them as Brahmins, and then seeing these people as untouchables, or people who don't understand anything, need to be also looked. Yeah, that is a good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mandla. It was a lovely discussion, and we've already crossed 1.5 hours. We thought we'll wind up in 1 hour. I think we are probably, this also speaks about the importance of the book, and of course local governance. And Arjun, I suggest you just Arjun, are you there?
I'm here, sir.
Yeah, so if you want to make some remark, else we'll just wind it up.
So we have Manish ji. Yeah, Manish.
Actually, and I forgot to mention, because there were a few queries here, and the queries said, can there be a question answer? I think we can take if there are some Q&As, but I don't find here.
Yes.
Maybe on the Facebook, then we can take those questions. Yeah.
Right. Manish.
Yes, I have heard the whole discussion, ma'am. It was very intriguing. And like, I love the discussion. Like, one point you mentioned was like status of women not enhanced in Kerala. Like, I think the status of women is not enhanced in any part of the country for now. And like, after I look into the things like Hathras, we can say, or like Unnao, like we can say, there is a thing in like local governance of ruler base, there is still prevalence of caste system, you can say. So like, how we can like it's a matter of concern for us. So like, how we can like take out that caste system out of like rural India. Even like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar have said, like the rural India is a hub of Manusmriti, we can say. Like, people still follow the old age system. Even we have have panchayats which are still the things of things based on patriarchy's system. So like how as a public policy or an urban policy management, how we can like take that system out, like how we can save the rural India. Like I have one system, I thought of giving separate electorates for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes in local panchayat system, like which would help them to raise their voice against the system. So like, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, sure, Manish. Like that, caste is a strong marker of exploitation and marker of exclusion in all parts of, not even in the rural India, but even in the urban India also, because that may, the ways in which the caste manifests in the public spaces, sometimes it may be very visible and up in front of you, and sometimes it comes as a very strategic forms of, like in Kerala, you can say that because I worked in Bihar, Rajasthan, and then the ways in which the caste comes in front of you as quite naked as it is, and in Kerala, when you're looking, it is coming as a quite strategic ways of discrimination, not upfront, So the caste is there, and then the ways in which, then the caste, we are saying that when we are having the 73rd and the 74th amendment, we are saying that, okay, caste, the representation should be there. So to deepen the democracy, not only to widen the democracy, to have the people of, to promote the idea of inclusive democracy. But like Amartya Sen was saying, very interesting observation, when we have a very interesting idea, or an ideology, and then look at the institutions, and then we have the practices. So once you try to understand, then you have certain ideology of a inclusive democracy, participative democracy, and in institutions of local self-governance institutions to implement this ideology, and you have practices. But when you try to correlate between the idea and the practices, you see that there is a lot of gap coming up. And why this gap is coming up? Because of the social inequalities and the iniquities that is embedded in the system, that makes this is the envisioning ideologue and the manifested practices to be in a divergent spaces. We are speaking of inclusive democracy, and then we have the reservation practices through the local governance systems to bring the people in the marginal periphery to the decision-making process. But in reality, even in the decision-making process, we are institutionalizing the social patterns of social inequality and iniquities, and make the people, feel, see, for the women coming from the lower caste, there's a public patriarchy along with the caste dimensions, So in Karnataka, when I went there to do the study, when the people are there, the reservation posters are actually being auctioned, publicly auctioned in temple premises. So the upper caste persons are buying the tickets. So then, that has been open auctions, in temple, and that has been reported in the newspapers. And I went there and saw it by myself. So what happened? It's been auctioned, and then a lower caste, for example, a lower caste woman who has been working in a upper caste person, and then they bought the ticket. They are buying the tickets of the lower caste, and then it is all the whole question of, they don't even know that they're standing in the election. It has been bought. So that is what I said, the trans power, the whole question of appropriation of the ways in which the institutional structures are there, and then the dominant groups are still using the same institution, the same ideological structure to appropriate that. So the local governance institutions itself been appropriated by the existing inequalities and iniquities that is present in the system. So now we have to see that, okay, what are now happening now is whether there's a consolidation. So if you're saying in the case of caste, I could see that there is a very strong Dalit coming up, the Dalit voices, which is a political voice, very strong political voice that is coming up. So politicization of the Dalit voices, and then coming up and consolidating these voices, and then questioning the iniquities within that spaces, and then going for a counter hegemony through the mobilization of these forces will be a real answer. And then actually we could see some of these things and at micro narratives because in my study in Rajasthan, I could see, that at least 6 women punches who are actually from the lower caste questioning the upper caste women, upper caste people, and then saying it. I would like to say one example, and I would like to end it. See, in one of the panchayats, that this happened in Maharashtra, one of the panchayat deliberations, one upper caste man used to, when a lower caste woman was asking questions, he used to say that, okay, you people, you women never understand, use some abusive words against this. And then, and then this woman called him by the hand, and then slapped him, the Gram Sabha. So I'm not saying that slapping is an answer, but then resisting then and there itself. And then locking the office of the block development officer with the collective groups, saying that, okay, they are not working in the interest of the lower caste women. So there are multiple very local narratives that is emerging, which is actually a manifested voices of these local narratives coming through the mobilization of the Dalit voices. So it is happening here. We will see. So I'm optimistic.
Yeah, ma'am. Okay.
Okay, so I think before we wind up, I think there's a question also. Arjun, ma'am, what is the background of the implementation of Kudumshree? Why did this grassroots level social mobilization come to picture in the first place?
Yes, and let me also add to that. Yes, one question we can also take to way forward, that southern India is really, progressing much, but why does the North India, and ma'am, what do you see for Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or Jharkhand, these places, they are adopting in the government terms. There is a lot of knowledge transfer and everything. And since you are also COO, you can suggest what the other places can learn from these practices and how to scale up. If you can also take that.
Professor Manjul, have you got that question, the Kudumshree thing?
Yeah.
Kudumbashree, I didn't get it. What is the question?
Okay.
What is the background? Yeah. What is the background of implementation of Kudumshree? Why did grassroots level social mobilization come to picture in the first place?
See, Kudumbashree is actually a state poverty eradication mission. So it is a SPEM, So it is actually the importance of Kudumbashree, I feel, is the unique positionality of state in the, state is bringing in the neoliberal governance, where the state is never a part of the discourses, especially the public discourses. Now, the positionality of the state is brought back into the discourses, where, like it is 100% funded by the state, the India activities. So the state is the role of the state is back into the discourses, and saying that, okay, the whole question of, empowerment. When we're saying about empowerment, there is a lot of difference between empowerment and powerful. Empowerment means it does not have a history of it is a history of powerlessness. So that means some people who are powerless now a cautious and a conscious intervention to make them powerful. But when you're looking at powerful, they may not be having a history of disempowerment. So there is a difference between this powerful and empowered. So this PEM is a conscious effort from the state of Kerala, bringing in the positionality of the state into the discourses and to empower the people because they have been disempowered. So how can that is the whole question, that we are saying, and how then the women then started asking about the rights of their own spaces and position. So it's a rights-based discourse of development, where like right-based discourses, like that the poverty, when you're trying, it's not an income-based poverty. Any denial of human right is a poverty. So when you're looking at the Kudumbashree, because they consider poverty as the denial of any forms of right. So when I don't have the right to be mobile, women are not having the right to mobile, then I'm facing poverty. When I cannot choose my life partner, I'm facing poverty. So what is the power? The right to choose from the plethora of choices around you, and whether I have the right to choose. And then any denial of that choices for me, So the women looking at their own positions from their ontological and epistemological understanding, and try to look at their own status in their own neighborhood, coming together, seeing the right-based understanding of the ways of living. So that is the grass-based, so that we call it as gender self-learning process, GSLP, gender self-learning process. That the question has been asked by the women and they're trying to give answers to it because it's coming from them and they're trying to address it. So it's a very interestingly political question, epistemological question. So it breaks the ruptures, of epistemology of expert-led given, because the women are themselves asking the questions and giving the solutions to it. So it's an epistemological break. So that is the Kudumbashree thing. And the other one that you're asking about, the North-South divide, this is a huge question. I cannot, answer within this time period. But if you're looking at Kerala specifically, because the historicity of Kerala and the civic actions that happen in Kerala. So we have a literacy movement, we have a very strong library movement. So the civil society was very active, and it is active civil society in the Renaissance period of Kerala gave a specific impetus to the growth of Kerala to move it forward. But I could see, that the same the thing that happened in the new spaces of Kerala, I could see a withdrawal of even that, So I'm a little skeptical about it. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Manjula. And Arjun, you want to add a word or shall we wind it up now?
So 1 minute way forward to each of our panelists. If Biju sir,
Okay.
I'm also can.
So let's start with Dr. Viju, and then probably last would be Professor Manjula, and then maybe I'll make a comment. Dr. Viju?
Yes, sir. Yes. Actually, the mission Kudumbashree leads to a position where the representation of women in the local self-governments, actually, we made a reservation of 50% compulsory, it's mandatory, but it is now more than 50%. It is somewhat 55% now, because the women are now in a position to compete with men, and they are defeating the men, and they are getting opportunities there. And when Madam was working in Kudumbashree, she always telling the fact that even in the left political organizations, the women are not get elected as the key positions of the party. But now that also is getting changed, because yesterday in the area committee meeting of CPIM in Wayanad, one lady get elected by defeating all other male participants. She elected as the area secretary of CPIM. So in that way, we are trying to empower. But the patriarchism is there. The women are also going in tune with that. Anyway, this discussion is very fruitful, and it gives me more insights, because I am from the commerce background, and I'm trying to study the women as well as the tribes with regard to their financial background, family financial management, the financial planning aspects and all. And now this is really a wonderful experience. Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have Dr. Malika there? Dr. Malika, are you still there? Way forward, I mean, if in a minute, if you want to say, I mean, what
I know Manjula had given the explanation of what the comments we had given. But only thing that while she is mentioning about this labor market participation, and I have noticed that in India, the participation rate is high because of unpaid family worker category is very high in outside India, but in Kerala, that category is lesser. That means that economic participation is high. The quality of work participation is high in Kerala. So, and another thing is that Kerala is in the third stage, and we need more infrastructure when compared to all India level. We need that kind of a development policies. And the inclusion of these women and their needs, the planning process, and those who need to go outside and enter into this labor market need get some kind of basic infrastructure facilities. That part is not discussed in Kerala. That is the major reason which I had seen, because almost all in this, in labor market, the women, those who want to go out and search for job opportunities and all, so they need to get some kind of that infrastructure. So that infrastructure is missing because these people are not having any kind of voice in the planning procedures. That's the major reason. Because if they want to go out, their household is a production unit. If they want to go out, somebody should be somebody should be there, take that pattern and that area. So this should be coming if there is a demand. So this is the demand and supply. So this part is not discussed in Kerala because we are in a broader sense, in Indian context, we are discussing about the gender issues. And in that particular place, we can see that Kerala's this gender strategy, we need another policies while understanding the actual problems in Kerala. Because it's not exactly like the other parts of India. We should see it in a different manner. That's what I would just like to see. And there in the Dr. Biju has mentioned that the satellite, these units or some kind of NSG, that kind of things are going to implement. So it's an organic development is there in Kerala. A lot of people, they want to enter, but these people are deliberately excluded. And that's one of me. What I'm saying, a person who is actively, the male member who is actively participant in a political party or in social arena, their women or the wife or sister or mother is getting participation, but the other people are excluded. Those who are divorced or they're fighting, all these people's voice should be coming. It's not coming from top to bottom. It's the bottom level is coming, but these people are not representation. That's the major problem. There we need to create some kind of another strategies to understand the basic issues of Kerala. It's not like the other areas. Kerala should be studied in a different manner because we need the infrastructure which we needed in the third stage of development. We entered in the third stage. Almost all the other part, we are just entering in the second stage or first stage to a second stage, but we entered in the third stage and still we are discussing about this first stage developmental issues. So that is the major problem which I had identified. So thank you, Jean, for inviting me to be a part of this. Thank you.
Okay, so I think Professor Bharti, would you like to say the last few words, maybe in a minute?
Thank you so much for this talk and that wonderful discussions on that. And I would like to end, that it is important to understand the governmentality of this decentralized governance, and then the ways in which the mentality in which the people are governed and then govern, and how we are, all of us are subjects or objects to this process, and we are governed and governing. So how it is important to understand this power that makes us in the subject positions, all of us, So, and with that critical eye to look at the decentralized governance. Thank you so much, everyone, and especially.
Thank you, Professor Manjula. Simi, you want to say something, Simi?
No, sir. No.
Sure.
Yeah. It was. I just wanted to.
I can allow you to say something.
Last words. Yeah.
Huh? Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Manjula, Dr. Biju, Dr. Malika, the entire team from IMPRI, Arjun, of course, and Simi, and of course, Chavi is, I don't know whether I think it's too late, probably she has to rush back to her home, and probably we all know what we have to do now. So I don't think that I need to add anything else except that this dialectics of, what Professor Manjula said, governmentality and the kind of changes. So I think it's a long way to go, because there will be many structures coming in. Some will falter, and maybe more structures will be created. And finally, when we lead to a structureless spaces, I don't know when that's going to happen. Well, not in our lifetimes. But there's something very pertinent that I need to mention here. And moving from gender, because gender, I think Professor Manjula and both the discussants were able to cover well. Actually, there is this strong kind of alliance between what you call market forces, the kind of neoliberal capitalism that we're witnessing, and feudal values that exist. And it's pernicious, let me tell you. When because I have been planning cities. I know how the cities are planned. I mean, I was the directly elected mayor, and I thought I will plan the city. No, it's not the elected. There's some other set of structures that plan the city, and how empty-handed, how biased these structures are. I do not have time, but I could have explained that. And the kind of interests that they cater to. But at the same time, I think we should not miss the point what Professor Manjula was saying, and since she comes from a sociological background, is, the kind of society that we live in. Now, take, for example, I have moved to Delhi from Simla. I don't know why I did that, but actually I'm inhaling complete toxic air. Now I was just thinking about it, how feudal values, the entire system of hierarchy, the entire mobility plan. I mean, almost 70% of this toxic air comes from our own mobility, the kind of mobility that we have been developing in urban centers. And the entire hierarchy, because the push has been from more capital intensive kind of mobility driven. But at the same time, that is the kind of values that we have imbibed and we passed on the hierarchy. I mean, just imagine the prime minister going to the office on a bicycle, the chief minister going to the office on a bicycle. Why couldn't have we done that? But because of this hierarchical values that exist in the society, actually we are in a real mess. And the mess is not just sociological, Professor Manjula. It's actually in front of us in every sphere, I would tell you. So, Mayor, lights, more cars, larger the bandwagon. I think that's something very, very pertinent. In fact, when we talk about, we have to get rid of it. And in fact, this brings in to the last point that I wanted to say, is that the whole question of governance structures based on the question of citizenry, not even citizenry, residents, treating residents as equal, has actually now, I don't know whether we're in a transition form or are we witnessing a metamorphosis from a ruler-ruled kind of relationship, which is more dangerous. And, there's somebody who's going to come, there's somebody who's going to plan, there's somebody who's actually doing it, doling out money to us, and that's how we run our governance structures, is the kind of consciousness that is getting continuously imbibed. And actually that is how things are happening. I think so this relationship or this dialectics between the kind of values that we live in and the kind of what you said, neoliberal capitalism driven towards commoditization of everything, is, I think, something very important that we will be watching and waiting. Because in one of our shows we learned, when we plan the city, we will not plan a ground, but we'll plan a stadium. So we'll not plan a health center, we'll plan a super specialty hospital. And the kind of typologies that we build, now we're realizing, hey, we have to revisit the entire planning process. So thank you so much for these words. I think I would once again thank Professor Manjula. It's been a lovely, fascinating presentation. And also we came to know, I mean, how Kerala is quite different, but the challenges also that Kerala is facing. And I think that's what is bound to happen as well. But definitely it's a kind of lighthouse, it's a ray of hope for structures of urban governance, where planning process can be decentralized. It was only thought of, it has actually been implemented, maybe not to the extent that it should have been. Thank you so much, and thank you, Impri, for taking down. It's almost 2 hours now, and I think we should go back, and some of us have to cook food while we go back to our homes. Kerala, I can still understand, because Kerala, your evening starts late, but here in Delhi, we sleep quite early. Or not in Delhi, but Simla, of course, we sleep by 9 or 9:30. Thank you so much. Arjun, you want to add something? Or Simi? Yeah.
Simi, word of thanks, yeah.
Thank you, Tikender sir, for your brilliant concluding remarks to this brilliant deliberation. I mean, I couldn't have really thought of adding anything else, because I just wanted to propose the formal vote of thanks. But definitely it has been very, very enriching and a learning experience for all of us to understand the decentralization experience in Kerala. The book that is written by Professor Manjula Bharti, congratulations, ma'am, to you for the book, and the book that has been released by Honorable Chief Minister of Kerala himself. So congratulations for this feat, and we also congratulate you for your upcoming next book. So with this, I would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of the IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. This local governance series that is being led by Tikender sir. Thank you to our moderator, Tikender sir, for this brilliant discussion that has just taken place, and to our discussants, Malika ma'am, and also to Biju sir. Thank you for your presence and for your contribution to this entire discussion. It really enriched it further, and also to our other participants who provided their valuable inputs and questions, and to all the attendees here on Zoom and on Facebook Live, and to all those, thank you so much that you will be watching us later on YouTube and listening to us on the podcasts. So thank you, and I wish you all a very good evening. Thank you. Thank you.